Welcome to the Fireside Chat. And every year we find a time in the schedule where it's interesting to talk to people about a topic that isn't covered generally in the agenda. I don't know if you know the other panelists. Drew, you might have heard yesterday, but I'll let them introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name's Gabriel Abed. I'm a relatively old friend of Moe's. Been old to the space. Guys like me and Drew have been coming to this event every year for the last 6 years now. So this event's been around for quite a while. The industry's progressed a lot. My background is a simple cryptographer that went on to start developing interesting systems that's specifically related to regulators, governments, and central banks. And we're talking all the way back in 2013 and 14, before the concept of a regulated crypto business existed. And I hope today that we can get into some of those histories, stories, and experiences to help the others in the crowd advance their movements in the crypto industry.
Thank you, gentlemen. Hi, Andrew Hinkes here. I'm a failed database engineer turned lawyer. I'm an adjunct professor at the NYU School of Law and the NYU Stern School of Business. I'm an attorney with a law firm called Carlton Fields and the general counsel of a company called Athena Blockchain. Like Gabriel, I've been coming to this conference for 5 or 6 years and always relish the opportunity to talk kind of in more of a free-form way about what's going on in the industry and have a chance to share some of these stories and some insight with all of you. Thank you.
I think we do need more microphones backstage. So if Greg or somebody, we can bring out some more microphones. It makes it a little easier to talk. So generally, global adoption is the rough theme of this. But, since the beginning, the promise was more mainstream adoption means the price goes up. And I don't think that really captures what the... One more? Okay. I don't know that they're... Does it work?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, it is working. Global adoption, in my mind, comes in two ways, right? You have the bottom-up approach, which is companies building things from the ground up, new companies that solve certain pain points. But there's bigger or different elements at play here, which is the top-down approach, where governments need to legislate some sort of acceptance of crypto or agree not to ban Bitcoin or allow exchanges to exist, or as we see in many countries, provide a sandbox for companies to develop in. How are you playing a role in the other side of things, the sort of the top-down approach where you help and educate and allow governments to understand and create the space?
Okay, so looking back at 2013 and 14 when we started Bitt.com, the concept was to build a solution within the Caribbean market that would solve the problem of remittance. And this was generally a bottom-up solution. It's how you would allow the last mile settlement to occur at the citizen level, the everyday man on the street. Let's build a solution for him. And we started going down that road, and we were quite relatively successful for the time, or as successful as a crypto company could have been in 2013 and 14. But then we realized quickly that what we were trying to build actually had a mechanism above it, a layer above it, that required it to be unlocked.
That was what?
That was the layer of legislation. What we were trying to do was in and of itself innovative, but it was not it was not allowed within that particular jurisdiction. It wasn't allowed and not allowed either. Laws simply did not exist.
As we say in Dubai, it's pre-legal.
Yes, and that the problem with that, it's not necessarily it's a great thing for an entrepreneur from a sandbox perspective. But when your business gets serious, the citizens, the government, the regulators, they no longer sit in that gray zone. They want to take a decision and make a decision. But more importantly to that, we realized that our business was solving a problem that required a top-down approach. So we started off with remittance, but then eventually realized that in order to solve the last mile problem of settlement, which is getting money into the hands of the people on the ground, so they can spend it, that's called the last mile, we realized that we needed to build something new. And we invented central bank digital cash. And we were the first to roll that out. But guess what? We realized that our solution didn't speak to the millions of citizens on the ground. It spoke to the monetary authority, the guys at the top. And if you could convince this central bank, the powers of a central bank digital currency driven by blockchain technology and what that can do to the citizen base, how it can advance their economy completely, then you can make a massive difference straight from the top, the guys who are in control of the legislation, the country, the economy, and watch that filter down.
So what you're talking about is starting with a bottom-up approach where you started to build out this remittance company and then very quickly realized that there were many different players here. As it relates to companies that are setting themselves up, some of the risks are, is this a jurisdiction that makes sense for me? Can we continue operating, especially remittance and money transfer? Are we in the right place? It makes it quite difficult for new companies to be created when it's uncertain how they will be received in the market. How do you see it, Drew? Like when companies saw that shutdown, hey?
Yeah,
that was good. How do you see it when like companies must come to you and say, listen, we have a great idea, we have a great adoption already, but we don't know if we can continue here in this jurisdiction. What should we do? What advice do you give them, or are you optimistic?
So as a lawyer who's been in this space for quite some time, we've seen this issue evolve. Initially, companies would come to lawyers and say, I'd like to use this technology to do something disruptive, and there really was little to go on. In 2013, we got the first guidance from a federal regulator in the United States, and since then we've had probably more guidance than we would have ever wanted. And so we've gone from a place where regulators and legislatures simply didn't understand to a place where now they have been given really two primary narratives. The first narrative has been, this is something that is dangerous and scary, and we should try to kill this. This is the narrative that talks about the abuses of this technology and all of the sort of potential negative repercussions. The other narrative they've been given is, this is revolutionary technology that's going to absolutely change the world, and thus you should be facilitating it and helping to incubate and grow it. This will bring you jobs. This will bring you economic prosperity. And so we've seen legislatures wrestling with this issue. Do we kill it or do we grow it? And how do we find the middle place? Most states have taken the position that they want to study it. And so they've created task forces. I think there are 14 US state task forces that have appointed panels, some of which are comprised by practicing lawyers, some of which are corporate players, that are examining the best use cases for the integration into government and that are looking to try to figure out how they can use the various tools at their disposal to incentivize businesses, whether it's tax subsidies, whether it's electricity subsidies, whether it's inducements to bring new jobs in. So I think we're in a hopeful place right now for businesses, and here's the plug. If you don't know what the regulatory environment is, go talk to a lawyer. They can help.
But are you saying that it's better to, if you live in a certain city, to make your company in that city, or to shop around across the states globally for the place which is, instead of taking if the government takes well, you're just going to wait and see, and maybe it'll be banned or maybe it'll be allowed, go to a place which has already given some good guidance?
Right. So we've seen countries around the world take sort of interesting positions and try to innovate in their regulatory environment. Some of them look very promising, some of them looked very promising at the beginning, but have proven to sort of be untenable and not really actionable. And so some of these sort of haven jurisdictions are trying to clean up their act. Even within the United States, we see a variety of different environments. One of the first people to encounter the problem of how come I can't use my crypto to do a thing that I want to do is a dear friend of ours, Caitlin Long, who wanted to make a substantial contribution of Bitcoin to her alma mater, the University of Wyoming. They didn't have the legal infrastructure to allow her to make that gift. And so she started working with contacts in the state to try to make the state friendlier to crypto. And we've seen, I think, 14 different or 13 different laws been passed by the legislature in Wyoming over the past 2 years that has made Wyoming by leaps and bounds the most friendly place to conduct crypto-related business in the United States.
I think that's a good segue into understanding what the relationship is between regulators and legislators and companies. Caitlin was able to go to the University of Wyoming, discuss with them, and start being a part of writing their strategy. What has your experience been? Has it been a uphill climb, or were the regulators open?
It's definitely a process. It goes back to the old adage that Rome isn't built in a day. And it's the same thing with regulators and the government and anyone you're working with in a public setting. And what's required is, I would say the most important thing is the meetings. You're going to have a lot of meetings, a lot of education, and it's going to require you
Were you able to take a meeting? What did you do?
You can do, okay, so in my experiences, when I wanted to meet a regulator of a particular country, I would send a cold email, a cold call, or I would literally show up in that country and I would get a taxi straight to their office. Entrepreneurs need to be bold and to understand that regulators are there to serve, they're there to protect as well. But ultimately, they're not trying to build a Chinese wall to keep you out of their offices or their ways. They're open to discussing things with you while being mindful of their limitations. And in the jurisdictions that we worked in, like Barbados and Bermuda, we saw at first, there was some level of resistance, which it comes from lack of understanding. But once the understanding kicks in and the education is there, you start to notice these legislators take an interest in what you're doing, and they start to move the ball forward in terms of legislation. They start to work with the government to lay down a new legal framework to support that innovation or that company that you were proposing to them years earlier. And the crazy part is that once you see it happen, you look back and you're like, well, that was something that was started 4 or 5 years ago. So entrepreneurs need to remember that legislators, the regulators, the government, if you're building a business that inevitably is going to need them from the top down or even the bottom up approach, they're not inaccessible, and it's not impossible to get that change.
I think you're right. And necessarily, regulation and legislation follows innovation. But what we're seeing is the initial steps that were taken by you and others to get the Caribbean governments involved has resulted in members of the government from Barbados, Bermuda, all over the place are here that have booths and are welcome and open to new business coming there, because I think the stakeholders in the government there both understand the responsibility they have to protect their citizens, but also to allow and incorporate new businesses in their country and have people that are willing to dedicate time and resources to their countries. And that's also valuable.
Yes.
Companies that you're working with, Drew, how have are you pushing them to get more involved with the regulators? Are you pushing them to engage more? Or is that something that you're doing at Carleton Fields as a side? Or are you working in tandem with them?
Sure. The involvement with the university obviously opened up tremendous doors and created opportunities to speak with financial regulators and members of Congress. Side note, America is incredibly open. You can call your congressperson, speak to a staffer, and express your opinion. It's encouraged. That's why they're there. I know of persons in our community who have written interesting blogs that said, why does the regulator do this? And they get phone calls from staffers, from people with regulatory agencies wanting to explore the idea. What we've seen with the crypto industry, specifically with the SEC, is kind of unprecedented and underappreciated. The crypto industry is minute compared to the overall securities industry, and yet the crypto industry gets an unbelievable amount of attention from the SEC, both positive and negative. Both the SEC and CFTC have opened up outreach campaigns that they travel, they have open door meetings, they encourage people to reach out and to sort of preview policy with them. We should not look past the fact that these regulators are actively courting your input.
We have 30 seconds left on the clock. Let's leave with a positive thought and note to encourage and imbue optimism into the audience.
You're up.
Oh, wow, way to put me on the spot, gentlemen. So I would say as a final note that where we're sitting right now in the crypto industry, it's quite beautiful in the progress that we've seen with the governments and the regulators. I think we're on the verge of global adoption becoming something that can happen within this year. Maybe it could be Libra or Google that kicks it off. And I'll remind our audience that if you're building a business that is innovative, new, and has never been seen, go and talk to your government. It could be a very great resource on your side, and they're usually open to listening if you're loud enough.
Cool. Governments court innovation. It is good for a country to be innovative. It brings revenue, it brings taxes, it brings people with high educations. Being innovative and bringing new opportunities is something that countries very badly want. Do not be afraid to interface with your government. They actually are interested in what you have to say and what you're doing, because overall it can help the entire nation.
Thank you very much to our panelists.